Good evening. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. Whether it is afternoon for you or the evening, here we go. Let's talk about Bubba. I suppose we all have an idea what a Bubba looks like and how a Bubba acts like. But this fellow, Bubba Wallace, he's smashing the stereotype. He is a whiny, entitled NASCAR driver who became a national hero and a figure of pity because he was the victim of a heinous race crime, except that he wasn't, which was obvious right from the very beginning. But the media and the elite simply can't stop being fooled. So a little background here. In recent years, it's become obvious that a great many black people believe that white people are obsessed with lynching. In particular, they're obsessed with lynching black people, probably because black people are obsessed with lynching. My understanding that the last lynching in the United States was in 1946, but I stand to be corrected. And that apparently the sight of a noose, or even the sight of a coiled rope or some such, any kind of knot, strikes terror into the hearts of black people and into the hearts of the media. So, Bubba Wallace was speaking to Don Lemon, a sympathetic interviewer at CNN last night. In all of his years of auto racing, NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace said Tuesday night he has never seen anything like he described as a straight-up noose that was being used as a door pull in the garage he was assigned last week at Talladega Speedway in Alabama. I've been racing all my life. We've raced out of hundreds of garages that have never had garage pulls like that. So people that want to call it a garage pull and put out all the videos and photos of knots being used as their evidence, go ahead. But from the evidence that we have, and I have, it's a straight up noose. Someone pointed out on Twitter, apparently the purpose of this noose would be to strangle Stuart Little. He's teeny, tiny. So Bubba Wallace is not backing down. The FBI determined Tuesday that the rope had been hanging in the garage since last year, and it wasn't intended as a hate crime against Wallace. Wallace noted to Lemon that both the FBI and NASCAR have been calling the door pull a noose. That is because they are lying. He said he hadn't seen the noose himself, but had seen photos of it. It wasn't directed at me, Wallace added, but it was a noose. Prior to the FBI's findings, fellow NASCAR drivers participated Monday in a show of support for Wallace, a 26-year-old native of Alabama who was the only African-American full-time driver on the NASCAR circuit. And here we go. When Tiger Woods appeared on the scene some decades ago, back in the 90s, well, he was the greatest golfer of all time. As it turns out, he is only the second greatest golfer of all time behind Jack Nicklaus, but that is quite an accomplishment. Bubba Wallace is not one of the greatest stock car drivers of all time. I don't know whether currently he would be in the top 50 or 100, but never mind that. Never mind that. NASCAR has decided that it must be diverse. What to cater all the black people who like stock car racing or like any kind of auto racing? That's not one of their sports. But NASCAR is determined to twist itself into knots to make it one of their sports. But actually, I don't know whether they think that this is going to happen. They just feel better about themselves doing it. And they hope to heal America in some way. Because the very fact that a half black man is driving in the NASCAR circuit is healing America. Wallace told Don Lemon that he found out about the noose's presence in his garage Sunday when NASCAR president Steve Phelps told him about it. The look that he had on his face alerted me in a way that I'll never forget. He said, apparently NASCAR president Steve Phelps burst into copious tears. Not very manly, but there's nothing manly about this story at all. Wallace said he was frustrated because the incident has some questioning his character. It doesn't matter if we provide evidence, photos, the NASCAR driver said. It will always be photoshopped. I will always have haters. Essentially, he's saying, yeah, there's evidence that this rope used to open and close the garage door had been there for months and months and months, but pay no attention to that because my feelings are hurt. I'm looking at a picture of this obnoxious young man. He is wearing a white sweatshirt over a t-shirt that says, I can't breathe, and he's wearing an American flag as a mouth diaper. Grossly disrespectful, but there you go. People are comparing him to Jussie Smollett, the Chicago hate hoaxer. They are calling him the race car driver of NASCAR. People are having a lot of fun with this. Of course, he races for Richard Petty's team, which to a lot of Americans is annoying, to put it mildly. Let's see at the conservative treehouse comments. Wallace could accept the FBI NASCAR finding and admit an honest mistake was made by an overly sensitive Richard Petty racing team, or he could make racism his new identity in NASCAR, as Colin Kaepernick did with football in the NFL. Bubba Wallace chose the latter. As a result of Wallace's new identity and his announced career goals, NASCAR will now fragment in the same way as the National Football League. Social justice will now define Wallace's professional effort. Driving with NASCAR becomes a method to achieve his new career aspirations. That inflection point, his identity choice, is clear in the interview. Obviously, Richard Petty's team are socially woke and enlightened to their obligations in a new era of racial sensitivity. Notice the careful wording. Discovered a rope tied in the fashion of a noose. Keyword fashion. The careful wording allows the statement to skirt on the fringes of common sense truth because they don't technically say it's a noose, unlike the Department of Justice and the FBI, which straight out lied. Quite simply because it isn't. If it were a noose, it would be useless as a garage door pull. This brings up the second obtuse aspect of the sentence, discovered a rope. Notice they don't say it was attached to the garage door pull, which it was, because that would make their misinterpretation seem even more ridiculous. Saying we discovered a garage door pull-down rope that appeared to be fashioned as a noose would elicit eye rolls. So they carefully avoid noting their stupidity by ignoring common sense. Now keep in mind, we're talking about a racing team. So we see some sort of implement attached to a garage door. And I'm rather thinking that, being the practical men that they are, well, what is this thing for? Oh, I get it. It's to open and close the door. All right. False alarm. Did they do that or not? Did they do that or not? Or did they go shrieking like teenage girls to the vice principal, screaming of hate crime? Because it appears that the latter is exactly what they did. NASCAR, Richard Petty Motorsports, they have protocols for making stupid stuff into bigger stupid stuff by notifying ever-increasing pearl clutchers. Yes, this is what they said. According to established protocols, our team noticed the crew chief. Yes, the established protocol of seeing a piece of rope in a garage. From that moment forward, NASCAR, the corporate side, the public relations, brand image, and risk management side took over. Thus, the culturally sensitive and politically correct NASCAR president, Steve Phelps, who found himself in the motorhome of Bubba Wallace crying and explaining that, quote, a hate crime has been committed against him, unquote. Yes, that's what happened. Throughout this event, from the moment the garage door pull was defined as a noose, common sense was displaced by an overwhelming urge to be appropriately sensitive to the slightest possibility that something terribly untoward may be afoot. The 800-pound gorilla in the corner of the decision-making space is NASCAR's intention to find a new culturally diverse audience. A corporation's cultural direction once again drowned common sense. I first knew of Richard Petty because my father was in the car business, and he worked for Chrysler. And Richard Petty drove Chryslers. That was back in the day when there was actually some variety in NASCAR. So I followed NASCAR for a while. Again, as Paul Tracy once told me in an interview, he did not see the appeal of Chevy Luminas driving in a circle. But I know that a lot of Americans seem to like it, although less now than previously. Not to skim the point, the choice of CNN's Don Lemon as a brother in the movement facilitating Wallace's inflection point, professional identity, and first public comments since the FBI debunked the hate crime in question should not be overlooked. Again, when you have to pretend not to know things, it is wise to lean upon a fellow traveler. Wallace's overt inference, and it isn't all that subtle, is that racist teams are running amok in the sport, tying random nooses on garage doors, and Bubba welcomes the challenge of overcoming their racial adversity. In short, Bubba Wallace calls some of those who just joined him in a unity parade racist NASCAR participants who tie nooses. Who else joined in? Stalwart, true conservatives, Nikki Haley and Ben Shapiro. This isn't the first time that Ben has been gulled. He was gulled by the Covington Catholic kids. And I use the word gulled, that's not really appropriate. Ben Shapiro and Nikki Haley and Conservatism Inc. are quick to denounce white people and white men in particular because they are seeking to ingratiate themselves with people who hate them. Now, let's, before I go into the bio, let's see what the Z-Man has to say. He has a column today called The Noosening. For those on this side of the Great Divide, the NASCAR news hoax played out in an unexpected fashion. Instead of the fraud going undetected for a month until some clever sleuth uncovered the truth, this time the hoax was revealed in real time. Usually the left is better at concealing the truth long enough for another hoax to come along and push the first hoax down the memory hole. That way, anyone talking about the old hoax is charged with being a racist conspiracy theorist. This time it was different, as the FBI flew in an army of investigators to hunt down the racist before he could noose again. Why they responded with 15 agents is a question no one will bother to ask them. Did they really think this was true? Do they swing into action like this for every noose warning? Did Bill Barr suspect a hoax and send the FBI in to expose it before it could be forgotten? All of those reasons seem unlikely, but the FBI responded with overwhelming force for a reason. Putting that aside, the absurdity of this hoax bears some examination. The supposed cause of the panic was a garage door pull-down that had been there probably since the last garage door pull-down was replaced. The old one, most likely, looked a lot like the new ones, as it is a common thing. Whoever claimed it was a noose was either extremely stupid, insane, or so filled with a sense of entitlement that he just assumed everyone had to accept his story about the noose. And I'll just comment that, of course, Bubba Wallace is now walking back the fact that he was the face of this outrage. Oh, no, it was other people like Steve Phelps and the like. There's a strong possibility that the truth is somewhat different. These facilities are not open to the public. They have loss of security. In this age, that means cameras recording everything that moves 24 hours a day. There is a good chance the footage made clear there was never a noose in the garage, so they quickly came up with a story about the garage door pull-downs. It better to be thought a moron than having to admit to being a fraudster. Just look at Jesse Smollett. That is a useful comparison for lots of reasons, but the one to watch here is how Wallace reacts to being outed as a fraud. As of now, he's taking this Smollett approach and demanding you believe him rather than your lying eyes. It is one of those examples where you see how extreme entitlement is what is driving this stuff. Wallace has lived a charmed life, but he assumes he is entitled to more. So much more, in fact, that anyone who dares say no to him must be evil. It is an unexpected result of the left's weaponization of blacks against normal white people the last 70 years. They have always expected blacks, They've always expected blacks to be a pit bull on a chain they can use to terrorize white people. For the most part, that has been the case, but blacks have been internalizing progressive race speech to the point where they have come to see themselves as sacred people. The endless doting and fawning has convinced themselves that they are exempt from the rules. This is most evident with successful blacks. Every black athlete walks around with a chip on his shoulder. I don't know, Michael Jordan doesn't. NBA players carry on like they are being forced to work the fields when in reality they live like nobility. No group of blacks complains more than NBA players despite having so much. This is something you see to varying degrees with all high-achieving blacks. The endless adulation from the masters on the left has led blacks to obsess over their own blackness. It is that sense of entitlement that keeps the hoax game going. That, and there is rarely any consequence to the people promoting these hoaxes. The pint-sized pundit, Ben Shapiro, will never have to explain himself. He got to feel like a hero when he instinctively condemned all white people. Then he gets to be smug while pretending he was never fooled by the hoax. He's not alone. All of Conservatism, Inc. plays the same role in each of these hoaxes. It's their job. This brings us back to Bubba Wallace. Like Colin Kaepernick, he is destined to be a mediocre performer in his sport who got a big leg up because he is black. In other words, his best asset has always been white guilt. The path forward to him is the same as with Kaepernick, which means militant anti-white agitation. Look for him to start issuing demands to NASCAR and other drivers. He will expect exemptions to the rules, and when they don't come, he will cry racism. The irony is that we will end up with something close to what the left calls white privilege, but it will be for blacks. Well, I'd say that is here already. For those of us on this side of the Great Divide, this is the way to see it. For the first time in generations, white people are thinking about race rather than emoting about it. Lots of white people are wondering if they want to live in the same world as people demanding they wash their feet. Many will kneel, but many will not. This is something that always had to happen. If it means the death of sports entertainment, it is a small price to be paid for the freedom to decide for ourselves. Well, I'll say in my own case, I used to be a prodigious consumer of sports ball. And I cut it down to, in about the last decades, to Major League Baseball, particularly Toronto Blue Jays, and golf's, the PGA major tournaments. That's it. Now, as far as Major League Baseball goes, apparently they're going to be playing a 60-game season. And I suppose shortly we will get the annual obeisance to Jackie Robinson. And apparently baseball was rubbish before he showed up on the scene. They have his number 42 has been retired permanently throughout the league. No team is allowed to use it. And every year, baseball fans, such as myself, are lectured on and on and on about the tremendous iniquity of the old days. And well, we're going back to the late 40s, early 1950s. That was a long time ago. And I suspect after the killing of George Floyd that baseball is going to be even more obnoxious in this regard. And I dearly love baseball, but, I'm prepared to do without it. And I think that many people feel the same. Let's see, Bubba Wallace comes from Mobile, Alabama. His first name is actually Daryl. He was born in 1993. I'm reading from Wikipedia. He competes full-time in the NASCAR Cup Series, driving the 1943 Chevrolet Camaro ZL1 1LE for Richard Petty Motorsports. Previously, Wallace was signed as a development driver for Joe Gibbs Racing, where Wallace competed in the Camping World Truck Series, driving a Toyota Tundra for Kyle Busch Motorsports. He also raced in the Xfinity Series, driving a Ford Mustang of Roush Fenway Racing from 2015 to 2017. Wallace is noted for being one of the most successful African-American drivers in the history of NASCAR. Well, I guess when there are 5 or so, it is not that difficult to become one of the most successful. As it turns out, he's not all that successful at all. He really isn't. 2013, the Camping World Truck Series. Yes, and he did that for several years, quite a few years, right into 2019. And then in 2017, he became the first African-American to race in the Cup Series since Bill Lester in 2006. In qualifying for his Cup debut at the Pocono 400, he was able to advance to the second round and start 16th. During the race, Wallace suffered from speeding penalties on pit road, including one while he was serving an earlier pass-through penalty. At one point, he nearly missed his pit stall because he looked for his Xfinity pit sign instead of the number 43. There seems to be a history of him breaking the rules, often seriously, and getting away with it. Let's see, 2019, despite continuing to have mediocre finishes in the 2019 season, and he finished fifth in the All-Star race. And yes, at Charlotte Roval, Wallace finished 24th after Alex Bowman spun him out on lap 42, after Wallace gave Bowman the middle finger gesture on several laps. Wallace retaliated after the race by splashing water on Bowman's face, and it wasn't just on Bowman's face, because I've seen the video. NASCAR Executive Vice President and Chief Racing Development Officer Steve O'Donnell said on Sirius Radio that officials plan to have a conversation with Wallace about the altercation instead of, fining him or suspending him. On October 5th, Wallace apologized to Jeff Gordon, AMR NASCAR Safety Medical Director Dr. Angela Feige, and Hendrick Motorsports Executive Jeff Andrews for getting them splashed during the incident, but stated that he does not regret what he did to Bowman. He was fined $50,000 and docked 50 points for intentionally manipulating competition at Texas when he spun his car on the track after experiencing a tire failure. He once again finished 28th in the final points standings, 28th. How many of these drivers in this series are there? He finished sixth at the Pennzoil 400 in Las Vegas in 2020. When the season was halted after 4 races due to the COVID-19 panic, he was 18th in points. During the stoppage, he participated in the NASCAR-sanctioned eNASCAR iRacing Pro Invitational Series, where he made headlines at the Sim Racing League's Bristol event for quitting early, rage quitting, they call it, by choice after wrecking on the 11th lap. Wallace responded to fan criticism by mocking how easily they got offended over a video game, which is exactly what he had just done. In response, his main sponsor, Blue Emu, dropped its sponsorship of the virtual number 43 car. Executive Vice President Ben Blessing said that Wallace's outburst would have been unacceptable during a physical race. As Blessing saw it, Wallace's outburst was not the act of a NASCAR driver, but of, quote, someone like my 13-year-old son who broke his controller playing some game where he builds houses, unquote. And yes, this is Bubba Wallace. Not a very good race driver. But after the death of George Floyd at the hands of police officers in Minneapolis, Wallace began to speak up about the issue of abuse of African Americans by the police, becoming the face of stock cars racing's involvement in the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm seeing NASCAR fans and Black Lives Matter fans as being at the antipodes, pretty much. But I guess NASCAR sees it differently. On the following June 8th, he called on NASCAR to mandate the banning of displays of the Confederate flag, which it had tried unsuccessfully in 2015 to request of its fans. On June 10th, such a ban was announced by the association. So, mediocre race car driver gets NASCAR to ban a cherished tradition amongst fans. And why did he get away with this? Well, we all know the answer. It's because he is Black. Okay, so yes, I talked about his rage quit. Steve Saylor knew about this fellow, wrote about him quite a few years ago. 2013, in fact. There was a fair amount of national media excitement this weekend over the news that Darrell Wallace Jr. had won a NASCAR race. Well, it's not like saying, you won a Formula One race because the race that he won would be the equivalent of not Formula 2 or Formula 3, but probably Formula 7. I've been especially lax about keeping up with NASCAR's minor league truck racing circuit, on which the 20-year-old Wallace triumphed Saturday. Nevertheless, his victory in Martinsville, Virginia, was deemed major league news because, you see, Wallace is a product of NASCAR's 9-year-old Drive for Diversity program. He's the first African-American to win even this kind of third-tier NASCAR event since 1963. The news should raise the question, if it takes so much organized effort in the 21st century for a black to win a small-time NASCAR contest, how in the world did Wendell Scott triumph in a Grand National race a half-century ago, back before diversity awareness? And he points out that there was a biopic, Grease Lightning, with Richard Pryor playing Scott. He was a bootlegger, which is a exciting story. And, well, again, I want to make the distinction between not just, say, Darrell Wallace Jr. and Tiger Woods. How about him and Lee Elder, the black golfer, I suppose, who's forgotten now, who was much better at golfing than Bubba Wallace is at stock car racing. But okay, hoax. Don't say hoax. Don't say that word hoax, because apparently you were guilty of racism. This is from the Sporting News, which I did not know was paused. But of course, I should have known, because in the last 20 years, especially the last 10 years, all sporting publications have become paused. Bubba Wallace is, in his own words, pissed off, and he should be. Someone called Tad, with 2 Ds, Hayslop, wrote this. The 26-year-old NASCAR Cup Series driver, in a Tuesday night CNN interview, admitted he was spending too much time on social media where strangers were blaming him for what was a misunderstanding on the part of his own Richard Petty Motorsports race team and NASCAR. Wallace's anger is not directed at those who reported and escalated the presence of a noose. His team and NASCAR executives reported and escalated it. And there's a mention to a noose here. The FBI said there was a noose. There was no noose. Instead, Wallace's anger is directed at those who are attacking his character. You get backlash every day, Wallace said. I'm used to it. It stings a little bit worse when they're trying to test your character and try to take something away from me that's fault. But the backlash will always be there. Poor Bubba. Below are some of the messages of pushback Wallace is receiving and why they are so dangerously misguided. Quote, the noose in Bubba Wallace's garage was a hoax, unquote. And then they quote from the FBI, and the FBI was lying. Oh, but now we get something interesting. Wallace, on Wednesday's episode of the Dan Patrick Show, said an African-American crew member on his number 43 team was the one who discovered the noose. Soon after, the crew member reported the news to crew chief Jerry Baxter, who informed NASCAR. Perhaps this African-American crew member could have asked some of the other people on the crew what this was. Or perhaps Jerry Baxter could have paid a visit to the garage. And I've got a pretty good idea that Jerry Baxter knows what a rope looks like. The crew member went back in there. He looked and saw the news, brought it to the attention of his crew chief, who then went to NASCAR series director Jay Fabian, and we launched this investigation. NASCAR noted Tuesday that the number 43 team had nothing to do with the noose prior to its discovery. Who is, apparently no one. No one was responsible for this. Nobody at all. Wallace on CNN cited a natural heightened sensitivity among all. Oh, yes, natural heightened sensitivity equaling blind hysteria. Almost 2 weeks after a Wallace-led push for NASCAR to ban the Confederate flag at all events and properties became successful, the race weekend at Talladega prompted protests from Confederate flag defenders, including a parade of trucks and motorcycles displaying the stars and bars. outside the track on Saturday, and a defund NASCAR banner featuring the flag being flown by a plane over the track Sunday. Whoever you are responsible for that, I salute you. Wallace was not directly involved in the discovery and or escalation. Stop lying. Stop gaslighting us. Bubba Wallace decided to make this the #1 story in America. Oh, like all drivers, Wallace has specific orders to stay in his motorhome while at the track as a coronavirus precaution, as opposed to, say, going out into the air. The evidence that he had brought to me, Wallace's reports, that's speaking of Steve Phelps, that a hate crime was committed, I immediately thought my family was in danger. Really? Did you really think that? It was not a noose. Apparently, that's a false statement. And again, yes, it's a hoax, but it's not a hoax. This was Bubba Wallace's shining moment, but apparently he had little to do with it. It was all going around him, and he was completely disinterested about it. It is all lies. All lies. But it is a teachable moment, as the kids like to say, and everyone must learn from this, including Bubba Wallace's girlfriend. This is from the Daily Mail. Amanda Carter said girlfriend thanked NASCAR fans on Instagram, of course, for their support, while saying white people, herself included, needed to evaluate their own prejudices after a noose was left in his garage stall. It wasn't a noose at Talladega Superspeedway over the weekend. We must continue the conversation. No one is exempt from taking a look at themselves. The fact I date a black man does not exempt me. Carter, who has been with Wallace for at least 2 years, was reacting after her boyfriend was the target of an apparent hate crime on Sunday, only to have his 39 NASCAR rivals and much of the sport rally behind him before Monday's restart. Oh, yes, let's see. She's written a manifesto, and I think I will just read it in full and then move on. And I will let you bask in its grandeur and its nobility. There's so much I want to say and so much I don't know how to say or have the words. Below are just a few thoughts. There is so much more work to be done. The fact that people think it's okay to commit a hate crime is not a surprise, but a disappointment, especially this close to home. What happened this week at Talladega is not okay. No one deserves to receive this kind of hate. We must lift each other up, support and protect our friends, family, loved ones. We must continue the conversation. No one is exempt from taking a look at themselves. The fact I date a black man does not exempt me. We all have prejudice and need to take action to change that and to prevent it from becoming racism. Don't rely on the black community to answer all your questions. There are tons of resources available to open your perspective. Movies, books, shows, podcasts. Thank you to those who've been working toward a better future, whether that is in private or public. These waves will bring change. Additionally, thank you to all of my friends, family, and of course, Daryl's fans who have reached out with support. I share your messages with him, and he appreciates too. I think I know. Sorry, something caught in my eye there. Sorry. Okay, I'm recovered. Let's look at the chat. Okay, let's go. Let's start at the top. Freddie Dunning-Kruger says, we was NASCAR. Echo Drive says, Bubba was hoping for them big endorsement bucks. He's going to get them. He's going to get them. I'm trying to trying to think of that name of that woman, Danica Patrick, who raced in Indy cars. I think she may have actually won a race, but she was one of the most famous race car drivers in America, despite the fact that she was not that good. And of course, she had a tremendous advantage over the male drivers because she weighed so much less than them. I mean, we're looking at a, 30, 40, 50 pound advantage that she had. British American says, hi, Kevin. I sometimes hear door closing sounds during the show. Are you in a room, not apartment? If so, why not your own place? Please excuse my impertinent curiosity. I have a room in an apartment, and there will be doors closing and other noises. I've asked for quiet. Sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less of it. You're going to be hearing extraneous street noise, because it is very, well, it's hot for Victoria, but given that I'm in a small room and I have to close the door, I have opened the window a bit. Don't be alarmed. I live a block away from one of the busiest intersections in Victoria, and this is not a particularly salubrious neighborhood. There are an awful lot of police cars, an awful lot of sirens, an awful lot of ambulances, and the like. Last night, 2 police cars were summoned. There were 2 people, a man and a woman, I think down in the parking lot, or they could have been on one of the balconies, screaming at each other in a foreign language I did not recognize. William Hicks says, Bubba ain't no Hank Aaron. Hammer and Hank has the letters to prove what he put up with, death threats, hate-filled screeds, 1974. Yes, I remember that. And Hank Aaron may still work for the Atlanta Braves. He certainly worked in the front office for many decades. He seemed an extraordinarily bitter man in all the interviews I saw of him. Now, I remember when Roger Maris was on track to break Babe Ruth's record of 60 home runs in a season. Roger Maris got an enormous amount of death threats. And suffered all manner of abuse, such that his hair started falling out. I don't know, people get irrational when records are about to be broken. I'm sure that race played some part in the abuse directed at Hank Aaron, but I don't think that was the main part of it. I just think it was all about Babe Ruth again. Danny Rose says, asked a far leftist today what should be done with Trump supporters who don't go along with BLM. His answer, the Trump people will have to follow suit or fight back. William Hicks, Zero Hedge Report says Bubba's walking back now. I don't know. I think it's too late. I think it's too late. British American says Bubba wants to be another Kaepernick, a pro SJW who is very well remunerated indeed. Well, it's my understanding that Colin Kaepernick has a woke Muslim girlfriend who schooled him in the ways of wokeness. LeCompte Brea says, how do you fight a crazy? Well, I'm reminded of an episode of 30 Rock. I'm going to mention them again this week. Where Jack Donaghy was called on to do something about Liz's father, who decided at the age of 80 he was taking a gentleman's intermission and started going to singles bars and the like. And Jack said, she'd asked, can you reason with him? And he said, no, I cannot, because he is being irrational. Irrational people do not respond to reason. They respond only to fear. And that is the element that has been missing so far. Although, when those 2, government lawyers, the Molotov cocktail crew, are charged with terrorist crimes now, which could see them spend decades in jail. A lot of fear there. A lot of fear there, because these people are supposed to be exempt. Supposed to be exempt. Let's see, meme t-shirt says, I can't drive. Oh, yes, Bubba apparently is fond of telling people that he's constantly being stopped by the police, and they're stopping him because they're claiming he couldn't possibly afford the car that he's driving. And then he likes to say that he has so much money that he could buy one of these cars for every member of the Cops family. Brandon Smith, Lewis Hamilton would go the noose route if Bubba gets endorsement deals, even though he's already the all-time best. Lewis Hamilton? No, Michael Schumacher is the all-time best. But Lewis Hamilton has no need to do this. Lewis Hamilton is very good at what he does, and he's universally recognized as very good or the best at what he does. Shogakin 666, Rosa Race Parks. I saw a couple of nooses while out and about today. You know, these nooses supposedly put on black students' doors at Yale University. Wow, how do these Klan members manage to get into the building? How do they manage to avoid, all the cameras in the dormitory buildings? I guess this would have to be, you'd have to ascribe this to the miraculous powers of white supremacy, which they're magical. They're voodoo powers. Chogokin 666, great book about it by Tom Wolfe. Yeah, about moonshiners becoming race car drivers. Indeed. Chad Chadson, NASCAR is pretty fun live. I can't speak to that. Never been to one. I've been to what used to be called CART, Championship Auto Racing Teams, which was the best racing circuit in the world, no question, because it was not so much dependent on big money. It was not so much dependent on latest innovations made by Honda or whatever. CART had decided they were not going to remove the element of, actually driving and shifting gears from the sport. It was actually possible for cars to pass each other in CART, whereas in Formula One, the car that is in first place at the first turn will almost always win the race, unless the driver gets into an accident, does something stupid. But I did see a kart race in Vancouver, and of course, I knew that it was going to be different than watching on TV, because of course the cameras are pulled so far back so that you can actually see the cars, and it gives the impression that even when the cars are driving 220 miles an hour, that they're not actually going that fast. And it is absolutely shocking. When you're standing up at the fence and you're looking down at the beginning of the straightaway and you see this dot, and then like less than half a second later the dot has passed you. The noise is absolutely shocking. It really is. Has KMG talked about the H1B freeze? I believe I did yesterday or the day before. Yeah, white pills all around. Jenny Rose says losing NASCAR is a clarion call to the strong. No, as I said before, I was once a voracious consumer of Major League sports of all kinds, and I just see that as largely a wasted period of my life, because there's so many more useful things that one can do by oneself, or with other people, or with family members, with your community. NASCAR is it's a virtual community, and our leaders want us all living in virtual communities, because there's no loyalty to speak of in these virtual communities. William Hicks says 15 FBI agents on a dime. Where were those guys when it came to Hillary servers and emails? Oh, again with the emails. Yeah, I'll just mention once again that Hillary claimed to have personally deleted how many thousand emails? On occasion, I have to go because of space reasons, or because Hotmail or whatever, or Gmail demands it, and I have to delete a lot of me emails. It takes a long time, and it's rather exhausting, and it's frustrating. I mean, you use filters, but you're going to have false positives, as it were, or you're going to miss things that you want to delete. The idea that Hillary Clinton, she spent an afternoon deleting these emails, it's ridiculous. She got someone else to delete the emails, obviously. British American KMG, apropos of nothing, do you have an opinion on Thomas Carlyle, a.k.a. the Sage of Chelsea? Well, he was certainly a forthright man. I like a man who says what he thinks. ESP ratings crashed 1/8, white pill. Yeah, well, as been pointed out, the ratings aren't important because if you have a cable contract, these companies like ESPN, they get your money, whether you watch it or not. What, $8 a month from all these people? So ratings aren't really not all that important. I suppose if the ratings went down far enough, then the cable companies would reconsider, the mandatory carry. Brandon Smith says, even if your team wins in sports ball, how does that make any difference in a fan's life? Well, it does make a difference, and I'll tell you why. It's rather similar to something that I observed, and I'm going to pat myself on the back here, because I don't think that anyone else has ever pointed this out. When you look at the team that has won the Super Bowl or the World Series or whatever, you will notice that you have never seen people so happy in your life. Why is that? And the reason for that is there's no responsibility involved. Essentially, it doesn't mean anything. It's not like being elected president or being made the CEO of your company or winning a battle where there are serious consequences to this. No, it's over. You won. You get a trophy. You get a check. And I suppose the reason that, again, maybe someone has spent time in a company, they carefully plan their succession, and they finally get the job that they want. They're often quite anxious about this because, there's expectations involved, and they might wonder whether they're up to the job. If your team wins the Super Bowl or the World Series or whatever, there's no responsibility. It's just pure joy. William Hicks says, "Go see minor league games." No, I think that's a good idea. MCT damage control. Bubba Wallace abandons noose narrative after embarrassing CNN interview. I think every interview with Don Lemon is embarrassing. I've mocked Chris Cuomo for his two facial modes, one, surprised masturbator, and two, about to burst into tears. But Don Lemon has one facial mode, which is relentless stupidity. Okay, Justin Proto, KMG, thanks on the ending of the Commie Utopia Chaz. Y'all be getting to that shortly. So all this concerns BLM, Antifa, etc. are part of the Democratic Party, and I will be talking about that as well. British American, with athletes especially, you could assume some basic linguistic competence purely from repetition of practice, i.e. lots of interview experience. Yeah, I suppose so. One of the reasons I like baseball better than the other sports is that it takes more skill. It takes a lot more skill. If you're a wide receiver for a football team, and I don't mean to denigrate their accomplishments, but if you beat out the fellow who's covering you, the quarterback throws it in your direction, and the ball doesn't have to be particularly accurately thrown or particularly thrown with great strength. It doesn't have to be a perfect spiral. It just has to get to you. Whereas in baseball, learning to hit a fastball or a curveball in particular is the hardest thing in sports. There's no question about it. And as for the pitchers, well, I remember reading Jim Bouton's book, Ball 4, which is absolutely hilarious, that when he was called up to the New York Yankees, I guess what pitching coach or someone on the staff asked if he had pinpoint control. And he said, well, I can get the ball to about a foot of where I want to. And the older fellow said, that's called pinpoint control. I mentioned Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan retired from the NBA at the top of his career, and he decided he was going to become a professional baseball player. And he found out that it was a lot more difficult than he had imagined, and simply being a natural athlete is not good enough. Where's Monsieur these days? Yes, Yes, I quite like that fellow. He was quite intelligent and a thinker. Head McNeck says a couple young women in NASCAR's media or merchandising department came up with the idea for a diversity program. I won't write their names here. YouTube does have its rules. Jonathan Pohl says, don't trust anybody claiming to be both black and a Bubba. I don't know, is that an iron law, like my iron law of never trust any woman who calls herself a nerd? Lecomte de Brea says, walking is the healthiest exercise that gives Tiger that advantage. Apparently, it's been demonstrated that walking at a stretch as little as 30 minutes a day makes a great deal of difference in terms of one's longevity. Brandon Smith says, every time something like this happens, it is amazing how many virtue signalers rush in to exonerate themselves without waiting for any proof or facts. Well, especially because of the number of hoaxes we've had, especially because the media, and I'm thinking of, the Covington Catholic kids, the media is constantly embarrassing itself by rushing with a story that it doesn't have all the facts regarding. Oh, we went with the facts that we had. All right. You see some young man grinning and an elder man glaring, so you assume that the young man, the teenager, has done something vile. That's an unreasonable suggestion. Oh, when we got the footage from the other angles, well, again, maybe you should have waited until you got the footage from other angles. Oh, but the other stations would have run with the story. I don't know. Maybe you could be the network with the reputation for not constantly embarrassing yourself. British American, what is most off-putting about certain people is the combo of low IQ and high self-esteem. There's a name for that. It's called Dunning-Kruger syndrome. It works both ways as well. And we see this with our elite, that a great many highly intelligent people find it difficult to believe or impossible to believe that there are actually genuinely stupid people out there, densely stupid people. They refuse to believe it. And of course, since these are the people coming up with our policy prescriptions, this explains why they are so often failures. Jan Reich says, is NASCAR even thought of in Canada outside of, say, Alberta? Well, all American sports are popular in Canada. They're all broadcast on TV. And I'm sure there are, NASCAR fans in, Vancouver, even. I don't know, Alberta has this reputation as being the redneck province. That may have been true decades ago. Hasn't been true for a long time. Alberta has taken great pains in an attempt to persuade the world that they are just as sophisticated and June as everyone else. Brandon Smith says, had there been calls for everyone else to take a knee so that he could win a race? I believe I've suggested yesterday that they just preemptively announce him as the winner of all the races. But apparently, this interview with Don Lemon was a embarrassment. I'm going to have to get back to you on that tomorrow. Obviously, I can't look at it today. Look at the reaction. Heck McNeck says sports fandoms are just a redirection of in-group loyalty from the national level to the corporate one. It also creates a safety valve for young men's aggression that might otherwise become a threat. Well, I don't know. We had two very serious riots in Vancouver over NHL hockey. Two very, very serious riots. And of course, happy riots, so-called, are very common in the United States after your team wins the championship. Of course, I like international sport is the worst because it encourages gross nationalistic excesses. I neglected to mention when I was talking about the marriage of Maria Brown that there are all these I mentioned the radio broadcasts, but the final radio broadcast is one of the The championship game of the 1954 World Cup, apparently considered to be one of the greatest in history, where Germany beat Hungary 3-2 to to a hysterical reception in Germany, and the idea that Germany had somehow been redeemed because they won a soccer tournament. The notion that sports greatness equals national greatness is a fascist notion. But, I like the idea, that El Salvador actually fought a war in the 1970s over soccer. Yeah, they did. They fought a war. Costa Rica, was it? They call it the soccer war. But one of the things I liked is, when Kansas City plays St. Louis and, Kansas City loses, they don't set out to sack St. Louis and vice versa. Donald Robertson says the shadow of the blinds on Kevin is invoking a depressed feeling for some reason. Yes, I pointed this out last week. It's the film noir effect. I caught that from a very early age. I guess, watching old movies on TV, that you had these movies with the Venetian blinds, and I looked at the shadows they created on the wall, and I found it quite frightening. But then I realized that, there's a whole genre built around this. Okay, it's also a communist notion. Yes, that's true, that sporting greatness equals national greatness. I just look, my own country of Canada, we don't have a very large population, and so we're not really well placed to compete, say, with the United States and other countries, and certainly not, the communist countries during the communist days. But the government is always announcing these initiatives for more money for Olympic sports. We want to turn out, we want to have sports factories for children, as they do in China and as they did in East Germany and Romania. It just sounds horrific. I mean, look at Tiger Woods. I never liked him for various reasons. He went off on a golfer for making some innocent jokes and pretty much ruined his life, Fuzzy Zeller. Then it turned out that Tiger Woods was fond himself of, shall we say, highly problematic jokes. He was always engaging in this form of humble bragging. He'd shoot a 66 and he'd be interviewed. Oh, I didn't bring my A game today. Oh, you were only 6 under par. Yeah, pretty crummy round there, Tiger, But Tiger Woods was raised to be a golf-playing machine by his father. He was on the Mike Douglas show at the age of 3 years old, showing off his prowess at golf. And you see this. You see this with a lot of tennis players, particularly female tennis players. You see it with ballet dancers. You see it with ice skaters, not the hockey ones, the ones who do the ballet on ice. That the whole of their childhood has been devoted to a particular pursuit, and there's no humanity there, or they break under the pressure. They just go nuts in some way. Is golf also an implicitly white sporting space? I think it is, although I think that a lot of these black music entrepreneurs like to play golf. I suppose you can hold a cigar out there. Probably. I hope so. Was the Miracle on Ice fascistic somehow? I was certainly pleased to see it in 1980. I thought it was thrilling, but on the other hand, sporting success does not prove national greatness. In the hockey world, though, it's Pax Canadiana. No, I'll just tell you, this is an unpleasant memory for me. In the 1960s, the Canadian national teams were made up of amateurs. Those were the rules. Now, the Soviet players, they were amateurs, but they were not amateurs. So they always won. Oh, I believe there was a team from Trail that won, Trail BC in the 1950s. But we were always being beat by the Russians, as we called them. And, oh, boy, we got our pros in there, and then we'd show them what's what. Well, that finally happened in 1972. And it just the jingoism and the chauvinism was revolting to me, the dirty play of the Canadians, the outrageously dirty play, the deliberate and often successful attempt to take out some of the best Soviet players. But the worst thing was that after it was all over, oh, this proves that our system is better than communism. Does it now? What if they had won? Would that have proved that communism was better than our system? Anyway, let's get back to it here. John Nolte, who writes for Breitbart, and I enjoyed many of his stories over the years. He had one yesterday called Mount Rushmore is Doomed to the 1619 Riots. And I found this quite disappointing because it turns out that John Nolte is still pushing Dems are the real racists. And it's also defeatist. There is no way Mount Rushmore can survive the insurgency of left-wing domestic terrorism currently unfolding in our country. Well, it is a stupendous monument carved out of a mountain over decades, by a Hungarian immigrant and his son. And how exactly would I suppose it could be closed to the public. That could happen. But then it is visible for many miles. How would it be destroyed? Nothing short of dynamite would do it, and a lot of dynamite. Also, if they're going to go out there with their pickaxes or whatever, their hammers, it's a very dangerous place to be walking around. So I think that it is safe for some time. And it distresses me to see people like Nolte saying, oh, well, yeah, of course, Mount Rushmore is going to come down. He says, we have crossed the Rubicon and there's no going back, no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. You got one metaphor there. Why do you need two? With the ongoing 1619 riots that were sparked with the death of George Floyd, the establishment media and elected Democrats finally decided to show their true colors and desperation by openly embracing, championing, and encouraging violence. Before the 1619 riots, as a country on the right and left, we all agreed there was one line that could never be crossed, that we could never, ever, ever condone or encourage violence of any kind. You see, we all knew that was a slippery slope to hell. We all knew that our civilization democracy depended on, regardless of the cause and our personal opinion of it, the ideal that we would defend anyone's right to swing their fist right up until it touched the tip of someone's nose. And then he talks about Mahatma. Actually, his name was Mohandas K. Gandhi, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And there's the obligatory, weren't they great? Oh, wow, there's 3 paragraphs of it. Let's see. The left are now the woke Taliban, and the woke Taliban cannot achieve its goals through nonviolent protest and civil disobedience because those goals are monstrous. So they are forced, like the Bolsheviks before them, to resort to gangsterism and violence, to terror and lies. And that was always the case with our leftists, not liberals. I'm a liberal in all kinds of ways. I'm talking about leftists. But you see, right up until the 1619 riots began, no matter how much we disagreed on anything, our media, academic, and political institutions were able to agree on the fundamental and moral right that in order to remain a civilized country, we drew the line at violence. I don't think that has been true for quite some time. The reports of speakers at college being shouted down, being forced to flee for their lives, this has been going on for, 30 years or so? We now live in a world where very public Black Lives Matter organizer Shaun King can openly call for the destruction of Christian churches, while Twitter allows the call for mob violence to remain published and the media protect King and Black Lives Matter by ignoring it. We now live in a world where Democrat politicians are doing nothing to stop the violence in their own cities, where the police are obviously being told to stand down as lawless mobs gleefully stream the statues they topple and monuments they desecrate, where a big city mayor sides with the terrorists who occupied 6 city blocks filled with hundreds of businesses and private residences. We now live in a world where violence against President Trump and his supporters is openly encouraged in the media. We now live in a world where a New York Times Pulitzer winner celebrates the idea she is the gasoline fueling the desecration of churches and decimation of Black neighborhoods. Let's see. Oh, yes. Dems are the real racists. In this environment, Mount Rushmore cannot survive. All 4 men carved into the Black Hills of South Dakota have been labeled problematic by the left and media. This includes Abraham Lincoln. Already, the location of Mount Rushmore is considered problematic because it was once land that belonged to the American Indian. Already, the man who sculpted Mount Rushmore is problematic because, although he denied it, he was once a member of the Ku Klux Klan, which means he was once a Democrat. Oh, boo, groan, hiss. Yeah. And the obligatory reference to the Jim Crow South. Those Democrats used violence to try and preserve it. Those wicked Democrats. I want to talk about CHOP, or Chaz. And it was a brief, shining moment. It truly was. But it is no more. And I'm going to observe a little silence. Okay, that's enough. Here is a message, which was published earlier today from the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest Solidarity Committee. I should preface this by saying this is one of the most remarkable and interesting stories going on in America and is almost totally ignored by the mainstream media. Almost totally ignored. Even the Seattle affiliates didn't seem to be all that interested in it. And there's just madness in the streets of Seattle. And you wouldn't want to cover that, right? So what's actually going on in CHOP, Chaz, in the autonomous zone, whatever they are calling it? So let's go to the internet. Oh, it all seems to be on Twitter or on some small blog. Because again, not that interesting. Well, of course, it was terribly interesting, but let's get to the message. Over the last 2 weeks, we achieved what no one thought possible. We successfully built a self-governing community and convinced city leaders to enact meaningful police reform, including substantial budget cuts to the Seattle Police Department, apparently $50 million. Last night, Solidarity Committee received notice from some of our trusted partners that persons in the park were in danger. We immediately implemented our emergency relocation plan. Just, walking a couple of blocks? Yeah, that's emergency relocation plan. Successfully evacuating most of the park. Thankfully, no danger materialized. However, we are now left with the reality that very few people remain in our beloved CHOP. This morning's census finds fewer than 24 clustered near the East Precinct. That was the police station abandoned by the SPD. 11 additional people are at the Space Needle. Yes, apparently yesterday they were going to occupy the Space Needle, but I guess, 11 people showed up. Last night's BLM march had 71 participants, a number we expect to continue to drop. I'm just going to interrupt to say, I was getting many reports, that there's considerable, let's say, antipathy going on at the CHOP between the Antifa crowd and the BLM crowd. It is time we shift to the next phase of our organizing and move from direct action to virtual activism. So you're going to be bitching on the internet like everybody else. Okay. Let's see how that works. We call on everyone to continue the struggle through Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. We have held city officials accountable and continue to do so in a way that is safe for everyone. The CHOP project is now concluded. While we expect a very small handful of holdouts may try to remain in the CHOP, no further organizing will be occurring to support this presence, and the number on site will be too small to be more than an annoyance for pedestrians rather than a zonal blockade. We have been briefed that full rehousing of SPD East Precinct staff into the station will occur no later than early next week and will be preceded by removal of barriers and the reopening of streets to traffic. Thank you to everyone for your support over the last 2 weeks, and congratulations on your victories. You should feel proud. Let's not this momentum die. Please remember to continue supporting the kind of revolutionary change we just created. Here we go. By voting for Joe Biden as President of the United States in November and Jay Inslee as Governor of Washington. And despite our occasional differences, we believe Jenny Durkin has stepped up and shown the leadership that will help us heal. We urge you to vote to re-elect her in 2021. So I guess what happened today, I mean, I didn't see it, it's going to happen tomorrow, is that all these reporters are going to be rushing to Joe Biden saying, do you disavow? Do you disavow the Seattle Revolutionaries? No, of course, that's not going to happen. But, put the word out. Put the word out that if you're in favor of revolutionary change, such as that at the Capitol Hill Occupy protest, or the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, which is essentially an insurrection with people's property being blockaded, vandalized, burned, thousands of people being essentially trapped in their apartments. If you support that sort of thing, well, you're duty bound to vote for for Joe Biden. There was one of the few stories I found in what might call the mainstream media was it appeared today by someone called Kelly Weil in the Daily Beast. And I don't know, can anyone write these stories now? I guess it's not a question of gathering facts. It is just confirming the narrative. This is her opening paragraph. After a few remarkable weeks of free food, far-right agitation, and I stopped, far-right agitation. What? Is that just a typo? Did it meant to say far left agitation? No, I think she clearly means far-right agitation, that there was this noble experiment going on, and these far-right people attempted to extirpate it. Really? Is that what happened? That's a lie. The far-right agitation might be that people like Tucker Carlson were saying that it was an outrage that the governments of Seattle and Washington State put up with it, but that's not exactly what most people would understand to be far-right agitation. Oh, and most recently, multiple shootings. Seattle's CHOP looks like it might be on the rocks. Oh, it happened after a violent crackdown by police against racial justice protesters. Oh, yeah, the police were so much in charge that this Indian, Dot Not Feather, a city councilwoman, led Antifa and their allies to occupy City Hall and denounce aforesaid Mayor Durkin. Activists quickly set up tents and issued a list of demands, including police abolition and degentrification measures like rent control. In a Monday press conference, Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin said the city would work with activists to dismantle the CHOP. Quote, "It's time for people to go home. It is time for us to restore Cal Anderson Park in Capitol Hill so it can be a vibrant part of the community." I can't take seriously anyone who uses this word vibrant, non-ironically, because apparently everything is vibrant. Now it's all vibrating. We can still accommodate people who want to protest peacefully, come there and gather, but the impacts on the businesses and residents and community are now too much. So apparently, 2.5 weeks of terror is sufficient? I'm really looking forward to the lawsuits coming from this. Oh, and she drags in Todd Gitlin, that old lefty creep, to comment on this. So, what is next up? Oh, yeah, I'm going to talk about the Democratic Party and its descent into madness, into utter madness, that they are fomenting race war in America, and they think that is going to help them in November. Well, as I pointed out many times, America is far different than it was in 1968. But the turmoil on the streets of America, and certainly the fiasco was the Democratic National Convention, did not help the Democrats in November. This is from Conservative Team. What have the protests and riots really been all about? Dems say it's for justice for George Floyd, despite the man who killed him being charged weeks ago. But new evidence seems to contradict the left's ongoing mantra. It is possible that all the uproar and attention on BLM is really about giving someone a 2020 boost. From the National Pulse, the Black Lives Matter website, the organization spearheading nationwide defund the police campaigns, is partnered with Act Blue, a Democrat fundraising platform that is the top donor to Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden, responsible for raising nearly 99.64% of the Biden for President effort. According to reports, BLM is partnered with Act Blue, the left's major fundraising arm. This organization raises money for Democrat candidates. Considering what has happened to the Democratic Party's own money in the past, being hoovered up by Barack Obama and then Hillary Clinton. Now, either the people involved with BLM are stupid, and there's a strong possibility of that, or that this is planned. Of course, BLM is responsible. Apparently, BLM has been pledged something like over $1.5 billion already. And $1.5 billion in campaign contributions buys a lot of goodwill from Democrat politicians. The Washington Examiner today. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi refused to apologize for saying that the Republican Party was trying to get away with the murder of George Floyd. Pelosi told MSNBC that the press has been too kind to Senate Republicans on the policing reform legislation authored by South Carolina Senator Tim Scott that she has criticized. Absolutely, positively not, Pelosi said about apologizing. The fact is, I think you, frankly, in the press have given them far too much credit for a bill that does nothing. They're saying, well, you have their bill, they have theirs. Yeah, our bill does something, theirs does nothing. Pelosi said she was not singling out Scott, the sole black Republican senator, when she told CBS News Radio, quote, Republicans were trying to get away with murder, actually. Now, keep in mind that getting away with murder is usually used in a metaphorical sense. That's not what she means. She says the murder of George Floyd. She said she was mainly referring to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell had nothing to do with the murder of George Floyd, obviously. This was the responsibility of 4 police officers in Minneapolis, one of whom is white, and they've been charged. They've been charged with murder. No one is going to get away with anything, although I have to say, given the medical evidence that George Floyd died of a massive fentanyl overdose, I think that Keith Ellison, the Attorney General of Minneapolis, may have gone too far, and he may have gone too far on purpose because he wants more riots. Look, Nancy Pelosi and the Democratic Party are fomenting a race war in America. When you say the Republican Party is trying to get away with the murder of George Floyd, you're saying that the Republican Party are murderers. They are murderers of black people. And this is going to result in further rage from people. And Nancy Pelosi, I guess she believes what by any means necessary, that revolutionary dictum. So there was a virtual grassroots fundraiser of Vice President Biden and President Obama with a particularly animated signer. I can't keep my eyes off these people because they're so over the top. And do the facial gestures, is that part of the language too? How about the silences? Because there are several points where she's not doing anything with her hands for a number of seconds. Joe Biden looks, of course, embalmed, as he always does. And Barack Obama has that smug smirk on his face. Yeah. Barack Obama said of George W. Bush, my predecessor, who I disagreed with on a whole lot of issues, still had a basic regard for the rule of law. Oh, you mean like the invasion of Iraq? Of course, Barack Obama knows all about the law, using the Internal Revenue Service against his arrogating him to himself the power to kill any American anywhere in the world based on his say-so. And furthermore, to subject all Americans to an entirely illegal regime of surveillance. But Barack Obama was never going to be held to account for anything that he did, which is lucky for him because he accomplished nothing. There's Obamacare, which was a bust from the beginning. It was simply a gift to the insurance companies and a transfer of wealth from the middle class to the lower class. And of course, there was his Iran deal, which has been dismantled. But he is a Nobel Peace Prize winner. You know, I'll drone you, he said. He's really good at, I said, I'm really good at droning. That certainly sounds like a Peace Prize winner. Oh, and Barack Obama, the great intellectual. Have you ever heard Barack Obama say anything that was profound or even interesting? Anything? Ever? Years ago, there used to be ads on TV for something called the History Book Club. I know it sounds crazy, but back in the 80s, yes, there were ads for the History Book Club. And so the pitchman, he begins by saying, Harry Truman said, there's nothing new in the world except the history you don't know. And I thought, Harry Truman never said that, because I don't like Harry Truman. And I thought, that's really good. That is really good. But Barack Obama, no, nothing. Nothing. But he's supposedly some sage from Breitbart. Former President Obama referred to the ongoing unrest around the country associated with the Black Lives Matter protests as a great awakening. Now, Obama, as we learned from that infamous interview he did with the Chicago Sun-Times some years ago, he likes to pontificate about religion. It's clear he doesn't know very much about it. The Great Awakening has a specific meaning, and many Americans know what the Great Awakening refers to. Obama speaking, what he says, what we have seen over the last couple of years is a White House enabled by Republicans in Congress and a media structure that supports him. It's just gaslighting, all the time, gaslighters all the way down. The media structure supports the White House and the Republicans in Congress. Does he mean that Trump still gets media coverage? That he's still shown on TV? Is that what he means? Because that could be. Because there have been suggestions made that the media should simply stop covering Trump. That they should stop, showing video of him speaking. Yeah. Let's see. This is a media structure that supports him that is not just different in terms of policy, but has gone to the very foundations of who we are and who we should be. That suggests facts don't matter. Science doesn't matter. That suggests that a deadly disease is fake news. You're lying again, Obama, because Trump never said that. That sees the Justice Department as simply an extension and arm of the personal concerns of the president. This is grade A large projection. This comes from a man who used the Justice Department as his cudgel in an attempt to destroy the presidential campaign through illegal means, presidential campaign of Donald Trump in 2016. And considers some people in this country more real as Americans than others, that we haven't seen out of the White House in a very long time. And the good news, what makes me optimistic is the fact that there is a great awakening going on around the country, particularly among younger people, who are saying that not only are they fed up with the shambolic, disorganized, you mean like CHOP? That's pretty shambolic and disorganized, mean-spirited approach to governance that we've seen over the last couple of years, but more than that, are eager to take on some of the core challenges that have been facing this country for centuries. Again, hey, Barack, why don't you get into politics? You feel so strongly. Oh, you were a United States Senator. Oh, you were two-term president of the United States. Why didn't you do anything about this? Why didn't you do anything about this? I mean, it's just the chutzpah. Someone like Barack Obama can carry on like this. Of course, he knows that the media isn't going to give a hard time about it. Just a little background here. Again, this is from Wikipedia. The Great Awakening refers to a number of periods of religious revival in American Christian history. Historians and theologians identify 3 or sometimes 4 waves of increased religious enthusiasm between the early 18th and late 20th century. Each of these Great Awakenings was characterized by widespread revivals led by evangelical Protestant ministers, a sharp increase of interest in religion, a profound sense of conviction and redemption on the part of those affected, an increase in evangelical church membership, and the formation of new religious movements and denominations. Well, clearly, by that measure, it's not the Great Awakening that is going on. In fact, there were so many Great Awakenings in New York State that, as Tom Wolfe mentions in one of his essays, The Me Generation, that it became known as there is in fact a book, The Burned Over District. That's what they call it. The Social and Intellectual History of Enthusiastic Religion in Western New York, 1800 to 1850. I don't think there's much religion amongst these people shouting, I can't breathe, and no justice, no peace, and looting buildings and burning them and tagging them and all the rest of it. Rhode Island, this is from CBS News, Rhode Island moves to change state's official name due to slavery connotations. The state of Rhode Island is moving to change its official name, the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, due to its connection to slavery. I'm going to guess that fewer than 100 Americans know that the official name of Rhode Island was the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo signed an executive order on Monday to change what appears on government documents, and the state's legislature is moving forward with a bill to alter the name entirely. The pain that this association causes, they don't even know what it is. They never heard of it. And there's a picture here of Gina ranting amongst a group of people wearing dreadlocks and the like. Rhode Island was founded on the principles of acceptance and tolerance, and our state's name and actions should reflect those values. She's just going to lie about conditions of the 18th century. Because, wait a minute, I thought that Rhode Island was formed in conditions of, slavery and intolerance, but the cognitive dissonance, It's true and it's untrue at the same time. It's like Schrodinger's cat. Oh, yeah, our narco-tyranny. So we have the chop winding down, but we had essentially a terrorist insurrection in a very valuable part of the city of Seattle. And what did they do about it? Nothing. Andrea Wu reports masks to become legal requirement in Washington State beginning Friday. So the COVID-19 hustle is over, but now everyone in Washington State must wear face diapers. Meanwhile, the governor sat on his hands while an insurrection broke out in Seattle, a narco-tyranny in action. Do I want to talk about this piece by Ida Bay Wells? Bay. See, it used to be B. There's a famous black journalist. It was Ida B. Wells. She's Ida Bay Wells, B-A-E, because she's just so smoking hot. Well, she isn't. And you can only blame yourselves if you go looking for pictures of this woman, whose actual name is Nicole something. Here, let me get this. There are several. I have these opened up in various browsers for various reasons. And sometimes when I have a whole bunch of them, it is difficult to get to them. But here we go. Nicole Hannah Jones, who has wine-colored hair. Ode, it's called. If true justice and equality are ever to be achieved in the United States, the country must finally take seriously what it owes Black Americans. I'll say it again. If you want to start from the 1960s to the present day, the amount of money that the United States government has spent and state governments have spent and civic municipal governments have spent on affirmative action and on scholarships. And I'm talking about affirmative action, both official and unofficial. If you want to talk about the, what I say, the reluctance of the police to protect certain groups of people who happen to be passing through certain neighborhoods, or when they're in their own neighborhoods, when a certain other group of people passes through. If you want to look at the consequences to American business, the American economy, to the American taxpayer as a whole, because of all of the, how would I say, all of the ways in which white America has bent to Black America since the 1960s, we are obviously talking about many, many trillions of dollars, perhaps, I don't know, tens of trillions of dollars, that this parasitical regime, it represents a significant percentage of America's GDP every year. And this adds up. She begins, Black Americans protesting the violation of their rights are a defining tradition of this country. Okay. In the last century, there have been hundreds of uprisings. Uprisings? Wait a minute. That doesn't sound like peaceful protest. In Black communities in response to white violence. They started it. Some have produced substantive change. After the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I think, is he the only man in history that has these, he's got the two before his name and then the one after his name? I mean, there's lots of people who have titles. And of course, the title Reverend is simply an honorific. King was a doctor of divinity, but of course he plagiarized his DD thesis. In any event, in 1968, uprisings in more than 100 cities broke the final congressional deadlock on whether it should be illegal to deny people housing simply because they descended from people who had been enslaved. It is a little more complicated than that. Yes, Jim Crow. Yeah, we're still talking about Jim Crow. And the further we get away from Jim Crow, the more we're going to talk about Jim Crow. Most of the time, these uprisings have produced hand-wringing and consternation, but few necessary structural changes. Well, she just talked about the Fair Housing Act. That was a pretty important structural change. After Black uprisings, there's that word again, swept the nation in the mid-1960s, Johnson created the Kerner Commission to examine their causes. I should point out that Ida Bay, or Nicole Hanna, depending on what you want to call her, she's a Pulitzer Prize winner. Yeah. For the 1619 Project in the New York Times, which has been torn to pieces by historians. The New York Times, every so often, they will print these pieces on the internet where the font size is, wow, what is this like? Is this 24 or 30 or 36? Because it is just that important. For many white Americans who may have once consciously or unconsciously looked down upon this nation's heavily Black and brown low-wage service workers. Oh, you mean by how? By importing millions of immigrants to put these people out of work? Again, this cognitive dissonance, Oh, COVID-19 made them realize that it was the delivery driver and grocery clerk and meat packer. Not a lot of meat packers, not a lot of Black meat packers left in the United States, Ida Bay, because they've been replaced by foreigners. But what the assumption is, every time you go into a grocery store or every time you see a delivery driver in the United States, that person is Black. I guess this is one of these myths that is being created before our eyes. This is what it comes down to. I'm not going to spend any more time on this gibberish. Blacks, as a rule, no longer consider themselves to be Americans. They consider themselves to be a nation without a country. And there's a very serious situation because their demands are endless, and their demands would result in pretty much the end of the United States as it has been known. Black Lives Matter is without question a black supremacist movement, which I can demonstrate with a story that is coming up. First, I wanted to talk about what is to be done. Yeah, that's a reference to a famous Russian work. You know, the conservative movement has failed. You've heard me bang on about this, but in the midst of this crisis, and it's a worldwide crisis, it's more important than ever that there has to be a countervailing force to the left on the right. And currently, there isn't one. I think we can start with dismantling the shibboleths of the right. We can start by its worship of mammon. Worship of mammon is evil. It is sacrilegious. But we're supposed to worship mammon. We're supposed to worship, in particular, the gross domestic product, whatever that might mean. We are encouraged to worship what is variously known as free enterprise or capitalism. But capitalism in the traditional sense hasn't existed since roughly the year 2000, when Alan Greenspan decided that money printer can be used to end the business cycle. Free enterprise can hardly be said to exist when the companies in the free enterprise system operate by the maxim, privatize the profits and socialize the risks. We are encouraged to worship billionaires. Why? Why are we encouraged to do this? Again, I'll mention, the Gilded Age, people like Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was a hard man, and he did many cruel things. However, he built thousands of libraries so that poor people could read. He gave away almost all of his fortune for things which I say could unequivocally be called good causes. Carnegie founded the Carnegie Institution for Peace, which later became taken over by communists. Big surprise there, like Alger Hiss. He was in favor of world peace. He was very sincere about this. But he did not seek to use his vast fortune in essence, to buy off the political process. There's a piece in the American Sun by Henry Delacroix called LGBT Always Had Big Money. If one talks to the man on the street about social stuff, the discussion of things involving gays will spark the use of the word evolving. They might say evolved. This is not true. There was no evolution. This was the work of the rich and academia to push acceptance, tolerance, and now glorification. The New York State flip on gay marriage was due to billionaire Paul Singer funding GOP politicians to make it acceptable for them to become pro-gay marriage if they lost Christian money. Singer has a gay son, Terry Bean, who was arrested for raping a teen, was a rich gay founder of Alphabet People organizations and a mega donor bundler for President Obama. These are wealthy men funding the change they want to see executed by politicians. It was to remove the status ding they suffered for being sodomites. This goes even further, and Rolling Stone's June 2017 profile did us all a favor in pulling the curtain back on a multimillionaire who funded so much for the LGBT cause in a way to praise him, Tim Gill. His sprawling network of Alphabet People advocacy groups rivals any big money operation in the country. The Gill Foundation, which he started in 1994, underwrites academic research, polling, litigation, data analytics, and field organizing. Gill Action, a political group launched a decade later, has helped elect hundreds of pro-equality lawmakers at the local, state, and federal levels. Outgiving, his donor club coaches the country's richest pro-Alphabet People funders on how to best spend their money. This is not a culture war, but a religious war. Here is Gill's quote: "We're going into the hardest states of the country. We're going to punish the wicked." Those are the words of a religious man. Sure, gays live in the South, but he wants to impose his worldview on them, the wicked. He has matched that religious fervor with over $300 million into his foundation, endowment, and other organizations. There is no evolution in ideas. There is a high that uses its wealth and influence to force what it wants on the low. Degeneracy is a top-down operation. There's no question about this, because when you look at the fate of gay marriage in the United States, in the referenda, the antis won the referenda. And then the courts, the top, said, no, this is unconstitutional. And then John Roberts decided to grow, to evolve as a jurist, as he has continued to grow and evolve. My point being is that we have to start by understanding who our enemies are. And billionaires are our enemy. NGOs are our enemies. Foundations like the Ford Foundation and the MacArthur Foundation et al., they are our enemies. These people are not like Thomas Mellon, using Gilded Age wealth to buy up the world's greatest art and build a museum in Washington, D.C. to house it. They're not like Carnegie, building libraries for poor people. They mean to steal democracy, and they're getting away with it. I was curious. I'm looking at this picture of Terry Bean. Physiognomy is real. It is real, no question about it. So let's see. Very, very long Wikipedia entry about Terry Bean. It's almost a hagiography. Let's see. On November 19th, 2014, Terry Bean was arrested on charges of sodomy and sex abuse in a case involving a 15-year-old boy. And apparently there was another adult involved in what Bean's lawyer, Kristen Weinmiller, characterized as an extortion attempt by an ex-lover. Bean and the youth reached a civil agreement, which the judge ultimately rejected. The alleged victim declined to testify. So the judge dismissed the case in 2015 without prejudice. You can figure out what happened there. So I decided to look a little deeper into this. Detectives from the Portland Police Sex Crimes Unit arrested Portland developer Terrence Patrick Bean on a Lane County indictment stemming from alleged sex abuse involving a teenage boy in 2013. Detectives in the sex crime unit are the lead investigators in the case and working closely with other offices. The alleged incident involved a sexual encounter in Eugene with a 15-year-old boy. Another person alleged to have been involved in that encounter is also expected to face arrest as part of the indictment. Bean's lawyer, Kristen Weinmiller, said in a statement that Bean has cooperated with the investigation, adding that it's her client who was the, quote, victim of an extortion ring, unquote, by several men. Terry Bean is a highly respected community leader who has devoted his life to bettering our community. Over the course of several months in 2013 to 2014, he was the victim of an extortion ring led by several men known to law enforcement. This current arrest is connected to the ongoing investigation of that case in which Bean has fully cooperated. No allegations against Terry Bean should be taken at face value. We look forward to the opportunity to clear his name. The Willamette Week did a cover story in June on Bean about a love affair gone wrong and allegations that he had videotaped his encounters with former boyfriends. So the obvious question, which is not in the Wikipedia entry or in the story in the Oregonian, what is the age of consent in the state of Oregon? It is 18 years old. So whether or not, crimes against these laws are they're called, I forget the term, but that is to say, consent is irrelevant. And not knowing the age of the person involved is irrelevant. It is simply a crime. If you have sex in the state of Oregon with someone, male or female, under the age of 18, you have committed a crime. And given that Terry Bean was decades older than this 15-year-old at the time, the state or states have looked very dimly on such activity. And yet Terry Bean was not charged with statutory rape. And one wonders why. Well, one knows why. He paid off this kid. We never knew the identities of the other adults who were involved in this activity, which rather sounds like an orgy. But this is what big money will buy you. If you're Jeffrey Epstein, I guess you can get away with pretty much anything. And of course, it helps to have friends like Bill Clinton. The rich, they want to control the discourse. All of it. Okay? And they're not shy about acting on that desire. Peter Brimlow has a piece on VDARE yesterday. And he talks about some good news. I'm writing you in the wake of a great victory for immigration patriots. President Donald J. Trump has extended his April 20th restrictions on the immigration of foreign workers, specifically citing the labor market impact on American workers, an issue that never entered public debate, despite VDARE.com's best efforts during the 2008 Great Recession. This vindicates my April the 21st observation that Trump has put an immigration moratorium in play, and it's not something I personally can contemplate without emotion, having advocated it since 1992. Now the bad news. Despite, or in fact, because of this victory, the tech totalitarian crackdown on immigration patriots is reaching unprecedented intensity. Network Solutions, VDARE's domain registrar of some 20 years, has uncouthly refused to extend the 10 days it gave us to find another domain registrar. It also now frankly admits that it is censoring us on purely political grounds, alleged bigotry, racism, discrimination, or hatred, aka daring to discuss immigration reduction. Since our content and tone has not changed over the entire 20-year span of our professional relationship, this simply shows how much the tech totalitarians are tightening their censorship. It's all Donald Trump's fault for getting elected in 2016 and having the temerity to run for re-election in 2020. Now, Peter Brimlow explains that there will be an archive of the VDARE site, and you will still be able to get a hold of it if you enable Tor on the Brave browser. I use the Brave browser myself, and I'm very, very pleased with it for all sorts of reasons. And I have enabled Tor, so I guess I will be able to read VDARE when it enters the dark web, as it's called. Brimlow explains, it now appears that our termination was incited by a lavishly funded by rich people, DC-based thug group called the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, headed by a black woman called Kristen Clark, pictured right. VDARE has now begun the process of migrating to a new domain registrar. It is possible our site may go dark during this process, possibly for several days. And if you look at this essay, instructions are given about how to continue to access VDARE. I've written for VDARE for decades, and I'm a friend of Peter Brimlow. But aside from all that, it is an invaluable site, and these are brave people, and they deserve to be supported. So what else do we have here on the subject of, rich people crushing free speech? Well, the Voice of Europe is gone. It's a site that I found valuable on many occasions. The editorial staff at Voice of Europe regrets to inform you that we will be ceasing our news publishing operations indefinitely. Our decision, of course, comes with the heaviest of hearts and follows months of increased censorship from Google, Facebook, and Twitter. Furthermore, our ability to monetize our content, which had already been greatly diminished as a result of the virus's economic effects, was recently taken away completely when our ad platforms banned us outright. Yes, and you see, NBC, which is owned by Universal, which is owned by Comcast, cable company, we're talking big money here. NBC goes running to Google to say Zero Hedge and the Federalists, oh, they're very bad. You have any idea the sort of things that are said in the comments? They must be punished. So they were. And the media, the big money media is the Stasi now. And the libertarians will say, well, it doesn't matter because it's not the government. Well, what is to be done? The libertarians must be purged. from the right. They must be informed as many times as necessary that their ideas are ridiculous, hateful, and nobody likes them. You know, if the Koch brothers, or the one remaining Koch brother, want to continue to spend a small fortune in order to talk up, free markets, as they call them, well, let them do so. But one of the reasons why so-called conservatives and conservative parties have done so poorly in recent years is because a great many people believe them to be merely tools for the money man, for big business. And there's an enormous amount of truth in that. And it must come to an end if the right is going to survive. E. Michael Jones, the noted Catholic scholar, has had all of his titles banned from Amazon. He tweeted yesterday, despite being banned from Amazon, my books are all still available for purchase directly from Fidelity Press. Buy them before they are made illegal. And Jeff Bezos, his Amazon, which of course owns the Washington Post, which is, it's another rich man buying influence, buying political acceptance, using the Washington Post as a cudgel against his enemies, such as Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has complained, for instance, about the sweetheart deal that Amazon gets with the U.S. Postal Service, that essentially the taxpayers are paying for Amazon deliveries. But this is from Alan Bokhari on Breitbart. Amazon has removed the first part of Killing Free Speech, a documentary about the threats to freedom of expression posed by Antifa and its allies in the media and Democratic parties. A second part of the documentary focused on the power of big tech will shortly be released. This is the second time that the documentary's creator, independent Danish-American conservative filmmaker Michael Hansen, has been censored by Amazon, as Breitbart reported last year. Hansen's previous documentary about mass migration and Islam in Europe was also censored by the big tech platform. But these people are our enemies. And to the extent that it is possible, we should no longer give our enemies our money, give them our time, give them our attention, record them any respect or standing, and seek that they and the people who support them are purged from the right. Let them set up a rich people's party. Let them start the oligarchy party. And, they could get 1% of the popular vote. They do not represent anyone except themselves and their own greed and lust for power. I'm sorry if I'm sounding a bit like a Bolshevik here, but I'm afraid, look at the history of the conservative movement, and it has led us to this situation. We're talking about connections, saying Black Lives Matters protests here, violence in the vicinity gets you banned from social media. Saying that you believe that there are too many immigrants to our country gets you labeled a dangerous extremist and demonetized. And now, with VDARE, stripped of their network. Shocking story from Canada. These are revolutionary times we're living in, my friends, because Black Lives Matter, but only Black Lives Matter. This is from the CBC. Walmart Canada said Tuesday it is investigating to see if items sold on its website breached the company's terms and conditions after social media users expressed outrage over All Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter products on the site. What is there to look into? It's racist. Remove it, tweeted user Beth McDonnell. Sharon Rochester, a teacher in Simcoe, Ontario, told CBC News she came across the shirts while shopping for her family. I typed in Black Lives Matter, and the first thing that popped up on the list as you scroll down was an All Lives Matter from Walmart. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. This can't be happening. Maybe this is a mistake. I immediately posted to all my friends, and I normally don't post publicly, but I decided this one was important enough to post publicly, and I just tagged all of Walmart's different company titles. Wow, she sounds like a delight. In a statement, Walmart Canada said, "We stand against any form of racism or discrimination. We promote listening, seeking to understand, and embracing individual differences. Today, our third-party marketplace has a number of items with variations on the phrase lives matter. We will continue to review those items to ensure compliance with our terms and conditions." Now, I remember when the All Lives Matter, when that meme was created, around the same time that It's Okay to Be White was created. And these were largely, I don't know, they were kind of jokey, because how could anyone become enraged by that? Well, people are enraged with it because white lives do not matter. This is the whole point. And especially blue lives do not matter because the police are a systemically racist institution. Let's see, Cheryl Thompson, who is a black woman with dreads, a rather substantial figure, in size at least. She's assistant professor at the School of Creative Industries at Ryerson University, said slogans like All Lives Matter are the resistance to the resistance. It's actually a big thumb in the face to the intention of Black Lives Matter. And we have brought back the blasphemy laws. But instead of blasphemy against God or Jesus Christ, it is blasphemy against Black Lives Matter. And let's see. Oh, yes, Vancouver. What's going on in Vancouver? Once again, this is a city I spent most of my life. Vancouver's gone mad, but it's been going mad. You see, these things don't happen overnight. I remember Ted Byfield, the founder of Alberta Report, a great man. I got along with him very well, but I used to edit his columns, and he wrote a whole book about this. And it was the 60s, the 60s, the 60s, the 60s. And I thought, these noxious ideas, do you think that they sprang up ex nihilo, roughly 1964? No, they did not. The seeds had been planted for many decades. Let's see, Andrea Wu reports drug user activists have blocked off the corner of Hastings and Dunleavy. That's in what they call the downtown east side. You don't want to go there. And are giving out free tested cocaine and opium to draw attention to their call for a safer supply. And there's a picture here of cocaine in a little device which stores it. Drug User Liberation Front cocaine ingredients: cocaine, 80% phenacetin, 20% phenacetin is a common buffer for cocaine. Historically, it uses a pain and fever medication similar to Tylenol. Contains no fentanyl. Please enjoy safely. Don't use alone. Drink lots of water. Don't share supplies. Have Naxalone and know how to use it. We care about you. Heart symbol. As they say, I am not making this up. And apparently in Vancouver, there's something called the Drug User Liberation Front. BC has reached an unprecedented grim milestone. 170 people died from overdose caused by an ever more toxic drug supply due to the coronavirus pandemic, which has shut down international borders. Wouldn't that be a good thing? And limited the provision of support services vital for the survival of people who use drugs. Well, maybe you should be pointing the finger at them. If they're supposed to be serving these druggies, maybe they should have been willing to risk exposure to COVID-19. They're the heroic frontline workers, aren't they? This, despite the fact that the federal government recently eased prescribing restrictions for opioids so that vulnerable people could access the medicines they need. Despite these efforts, politicians in British Columbia have failed to protect the health and safety of their constituents, leading to a record number of deaths. And there's a bunch of, there's an incomplete list, but let's see, Yukon Association of Drug Wars Survivors, BC Association of People on Opiate Maintenance, Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, Canadian Drug Policy Coalition, Western Aboriginal Harm Reduction Society. I was talking about NGOs, non-governmental organizations. How much government money and big business money is flowing to these organizations, which actually argue that solution to a record number of drug overdoses is to give people even more drugs. Because of course, we'll just explain to people how to use them properly, and not to use too much. Just stop. Just absolutely stop. But the movement towards total drug legalization, I always warn you Americans, if you are American listening to this, that if you want to know what horror is planned for your country next, look at mine. And as I say, this is no joke. The movement towards the legalization of all drugs is becoming serious in my country. Final look at the chat. Insurgency is like a mushroom, asked Donald Robertson. Jim Bowden says, question by a white Aussie. If equality is the ideology of the moment, when will NBA and football become equal in terms of black and white players? Well, obviously never. So Ashy Bravo says, have you looked into former USA State official Steve Pizzanek going on InfoWars to say that John Bolton has several sexual blackmail material on Trump? I don't believe anything that John Bolton has to say. I haven't looked at it, but I don't believe a single word out of his mouth. He's a neocon, and all neocons are liars. Brandon Smith says globalism paved the way toward white redundancy. If only veterans knew that before they saw it. Yeah, but they weren't fighting for globalism. What was the first war fought for globalism? The war on Serbia in 1999? I think that's a good start. That's a good start. Serbians were terribly, terribly evil people, despite being on our side in both world wars. Because they didn't want their most historic province being taken over by a Muslim drug gang. And Kosovo is a very good example of, it's just a few of them. It's just a few of them. It's just a few of them. We are the majority now. This is ours. We are leaving. And we'll call in NATO and the United States to blast you to hell if you try to stop it. Let's see. They worked in the 70s to end the heroin epidemic. What did, I wonder? Let's see. MCT says, and no one ever wanna know love ain't funny. A crime in the wink of an eye. KMG, glad tidings, blessings to all. Okay. Oh, this Steve Fellow, Ashley Bravo says, is apparently Henry Kissinger's right-hand man, which makes me deeply suspicious of him. Look, if there was sexual blackmail material on Trump, we would have heard it all before. An off-the-record conversation with Billy Bush from Access Hollywood from a long time ago gets leaked, 2 weeks before the election? Remember the Piss dossier, the Steele dossier? All the disgusting things that Trump did? Well, it turns out it was all made up. It was all made up. Head McNeck says the alt-right is essentially just a group of homosexual Canadian libertarians. I am Canadian. But the other two the other three designations do not apply to me. David Wright says, if you have a friendship and a good history with VDARE, why no more work with them? There's a problem writing for VDARE, which is that all the news from Canada is depressing. It's incredibly depressing. If you believe in freedom, or if you believe in the survival of your country, Peter doesn't like to run depressing stories on VDARE. He likes to run hopeful stories, forward-looking stories. And again, I'll just tell you this, and then it's time for the goodbyes. Peter has long been friendly with Pat Buchanan. Of course, Pat Buchanan was the co-host of Crossfire on CNN. And what was it, October 30th, 31st? October 30th, I guess, 1995, the second Quebec referendum. that Pat went to the Crossfire producer and said, there's a vote in Quebec today about independence from Canada, and there are very strong indications that the pro-independence side could win. And obviously this would be very, significant to the United States. So I think we should make this our topic on Crossfire today. And the producer said, no, because our viewers don't want to know about Canada. So that's it for today. I will be back tomorrow with Theater Thursday, where I'm discussing the first 5 episodes of Kieslowski's Decalogue, Commandments 1 through 5. I'll be back on the air at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. And if you like the show, I'd appreciate it, or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not already. If you'd like to support the show, greatly appreciated, of course, always, but especially now. My PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. And finally, in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly hope that my dear listeners and viewers manage to find a real human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.